In my last Architect reviews, I covered how Andor's architecture is a masterclass in how settings can tell a story, not just enhancing what's on screen, but acting like a character in its own right. But sometimes, that meaning can run so deep that it can completely transform the way you read a story and the characters within it. The next 6 episodes following the first 3 I reviewed center around a place just like that. A place that, once you understand its deeper meaning, makes everything that happens there feel far more devastating and important than you may have already thought. It's the kind of place that would make Marv proud.
The Empire.
That's why I've decided to devote this entire deep dive just to this one location, the capital city of Ghorman and its central civic plaza, a space layered in history, symbolism, and, as you'll find, a quiet resistance. And while I'll be avoiding major plot spoilers here, you may still pick up on a few broader implications from the visuals I reference, so consider this your gentle and only spoiler warning before we start. Now, while the plaza is the place I'm most interested in getting to, we need to go back and look at some context surrounding the city. So we're first going to begin at the edges and work our way in, starting in the residential quarters, where the resistance really starts to take shape. Here, the architecture pulls away from what we've seen in Star Wars before, which is still worn and lived in, but also with a futuristic look. Here, the walls are stucco, they're worn with stone cornerstones, soft arches, tight alleyways, cobbled streets, and all of this is pointing to a more layered past. It feels distinctly European, like medieval Italian even, viewed through a Star Wars lens. Like, if you allow the pun here, it's basically Italian vernacular architecture with a slant on it. The lived-in, unpolished urban fabric gives the impression of a city that predates the Empire, and indeed from the story we know that it does. It's one shaped by local culture and not imposed order. And that reading is backed up by Andor's production designer Luke Hull, who shared that the Ghorman city was inspired by cities like Milan and Turin. And I think he meant not necessarily directly for their architectural styles. There's definitely influences here, but more so for the spirit of the city. These cities were built on textile wealth, just like Ghorman, civic pride, and a sense of cultural resilience. Everything is built with meaning, and Ghorman shared that kind of lore, and that's where this parallel is drawn for Luke Hull, and we can see it in every scene of the other parts of the city. But there's not just an Italian bent to it, there's also a bit of Parisian architecture mixed in if you have a careful eye. The civic character becomes even more clear when you pull back, when we see these large scenes of the city where we see rooftops that unmistakably feel Parisian, with sloped roof lines, chimney stacks, dormered windows, all kept in a modest vertical scale, just like Paris, which famously enforces its height restrictions to protect its historic skyline. Think, you gotta be able to see the Eiffel Tower from most places in the city. Ghorman's architecture seems designed to preserve the continuity and cultural memory of the location just like Paris. It doesn't reach upwards to dominate, it holds tight to what it is, to its culture. And that French connection runs even deeper. The Ghorman language is developed specifically for Andor and draws heavily from French. So if you thought they were speaking French, they're not. They're just native French speakers speaking a completely made-up language. It's a subtle but intentional gesture, one that invites us to draw parallels between the Ghormans and the French resistance of World War II, a proud people occupied by an authoritarian regime but refusing to surrender their identity. One of the most elegant expressions of that identity appears in one of the quiet cafes, the setting for several intimate conversations, where a shot is framed through a wood interior window, an ovaloid opening, intersected by a single flowing carved line. The shape, soft and organic, is unmistakably inspired by Art Nouveau design, a movement born in France and Belgium that prized natural form, craftsmanship, and a human touch over mechanized uniformity. In a world under imperial control, it's a quiet defiance of what they stand for. Beauty becomes then a form of resistance. As we move inward from these outer districts, we arrive at the Ghorman civic heart, the plaza. The space is sun-washed, geometric, and quietly confident. It doesn't shout to be seen, it just invites you in. It's got a lot of beautiful detailing, and one that jumped out to me the most were the series of bundled supports formed by 4 slender structural elements that rise up together and then flare outward towards the top. The gesture is graceful, organic, and it feels a bit like they're trying to suggest strands of silk or spider webs, since Ghorman is known for its spider silk. So this and a number of other things in the space subtly echo that heritage, combining engineering and symbolism into a form that honors both nature and identity. It's architecture that doesn't just remember, it weaves memory into form. But where this space really started to make more sense to me, where it started to become more profound than I had originally thought, was when I looked at that central monument in the middle of the plaza. It stands for the original First Ghorman Massacre, and in lore what happened is that Moff Tarkin, you should know Tarkin from the original movies, landed his shuttle on a bunch of peaceful protesters, killing dozens who refused to yield. And you might think, okay, they built that in the middle of the plaza where this thing happened, right? But let's look a little bit more closely here. The dark tile patterns are radiating outwards from the monument. They don't just accommodate the sculpture, they seem to originate from it, to embrace it, like a spider's web spreading outward, or a ripple frozen in stone. And the design tells us something really subtle and vital. This isn't an ancient civic space that happened to contain the monument. The entire plaza appears to have been built after the massacre. Remember back to the architecture we're just talking about in the surrounding area. It's more like traditional medieval Italian architecture, right? But this stuff is more like modern, contemporary Calatravan architecture, mixed in with a bit of Art Nouveau and some other influences. Which means that this plaza isn't just a beautiful public space, it's a deliberate act of remembrance. It's a civic space built not by imperial decree, but by the people who refuse to forget what happened. A population that responded to violence, not with erasure, but with architecture. It's a protest in marble, memory made spatial, and it makes the Empire's presence here feel even more obscene. Now there's a bit of story here about the Empire building something in the background, and you can see it in several scenes. There's this towering slab of brutalist concrete that looms over the plaza a short distance away, and the Ghormans make no secret of them not being happy about this for many reasons, but why it's so obscene is that it is not trying to blend in. It refuses to, pay attention to the mass or the height of the area surrounding it. It's just architecture that wants to send a message. It casts a literal shadow over this important plaza that symbolizes a massacre. It towers over these rooftops in residential areas where everyone can see it. Its scale competes with everything. It's not just visually competing, it's ideologically competing. This kind of imperial architecture, though, is never accidental. Its form is not a necessity, it's a statement. It's the architecture of conquest as opposed to the architecture of defiance. And that's what makes Andor's production design so powerful. The storytelling doesn't just end at the dialogue, it's embedded in every colonnade, every carved window, every unforgiving slab of stone. Ghorman becomes a city of contrasts, of memory versus forgetting, of identity versus erasure, of resistance, not only in action, but in form. It's yet another masterclass in how architecture, when used with intention, doesn't just support the story, it is the story. Guys, Andor continues to impress me on so many levels. It's not just that its architecture and set design are great, but it's the writing, it's the restraint, it's how it adds weight and complexity to the events of the original trilogy. And to me, it stands out not just as the best Star Wars I've seen since Disney took over, but as one of the best shows I've seen, period. It feels like a true spiritual successor, a torchbearer for the ideas George Lucas originally built into the foundation of his universe. I know that this is a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but I just couldn't help but say it. This series has meant a lot to me, and if it's meant something to you and you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment if you'd like to see me cover the final 3 episodes of this last chapter next week. Rebellions are built on hope. And as always, may the Force be with you.